I'm going to change directions a little bit. You've heard a lot about, you know, UFO cases. You've heard about Roswell and different crashes and so forth from Paola Harris earlier today. You've heard about the spiritual side of what's going on, and from David, and it's very connected to this mentality that we're in, because we are in a shifted kind of place of consciousness right now, and I think it's really important that we do focus on the things that he talked about, and it's, I'm gonna give you information in a little bit different vein. I don't strictly do aliens and abductions and things like that, although I do know a lot about them and I do like to talk about them, but I'm more into government conspiracies, secret societies, what's on the moon and what's on Mars. And so when I created this presentation I'm gonna give to you today, I basically did it specifically for Eric von Daniken, who had argued with me about something called the face on Mars, which we'll learn a little bit more about in a few minutes. And so he is gone. He's on his way to Barcelona. So now we're just going to record this, and I'll send it to Eric so he gets all the information. So anyway, I've got 8 books out now, starting with Dark Mission back in 2007, and The Choice, which was about physics in 2012 and how our consciousness was going to start shifting in the next 10 years after that, which is exactly where we're at. We've got Brexit, we've got Trump in the US, we've got the Italians trying to overthrow the government. I mean, really what David was talking about breaking the mold and getting out of the established way of doing things, seems to be taking hold all over the world, and I think that that's going to continue until at least 2024. So I'm really looking forward to what happens next, and I just would like to recommend to everybody, just embrace the change, because we're getting things we've never gotten before. We got some new JFK files from the CIA back in October, and we've got a few more, 19,000 more we got just a month or so ago, and that's actually what inspired me to write my new book, which is Ancient Aliens and JFK, and what JFK knew about the alien presence and what he intended to do about it, which is what got him killed. So, you know, I really think that we are in a period of time where we're going to start seeing more disclosure, but the thing is that people always think it's going to be, oh, the president or somebody, the head of the UN is going to get up there and tell us that aliens are here and they've been here for a long time, and by the way, we lied to you for 70 years. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is they're just going to put the information out, and it's going to be up to us to decide what it means and what we think about it. So they're just going to start putting the information out. Even the new Space Force that the US announced, that's just a cover for releasing technologies that they've had for many, many, many years. And so what we're going to start seeing once the Space Force gets in motion, I think, is we're just going to start, oh, guess what? We discovered warp drive. Oh, guess what? We can go to the next star now without a problem. So they've had this for a while. We're going to finally get it. A couple of other books, Ancient Aliens on the Moon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the moon today. They're my 2 Mars books, Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies, Hidden Agenda, which is about the secret space program, which is a big thing in the US right now. Everybody's really like, what have we secretly been hiding from you for the last 70 or 80 or even 100 years, and it's, believe me, it's quite a lot. And just to let you know, I also have a new a novel out called Lightbringer, which you can get on Kindle, I believe. You can get it here in the UK. It's a kind of a sci-fi thriller, The X-Files meets the Da Vinci Code, so go ahead and pick it up if you'd like, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And I told the artist, well, the guy kind of looks like Clive Owen. I see him as that, and he literally took Clive Owen's head and put it on the guy. So I'm like, it's not exactly what I wanted, and God, I hope Clive Owen doesn't sue me at some point. So anyway. And then Ancient Aliens and JFK is my brand new book, and again, I'm pretty excited about this one. It just literally came out this week, and the only place I think you can get it now is Adventures Unlimited Press, which is David Hatcher Childress's, his publishing house. You guys know David Childress from Ancient Aliens, right? Do you know that everybody in the Ancient Aliens cast does an impersonation of David Hatcher Childress? We all do. Could it be, I don't know, some kind of impersonation of David? And the funny thing is, I was on this Ancient Aliens cruise thing with David about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now. And I started doing him, you know? And his wife, Jennifer, started just busting a gut. I mean, she started laughing on her ass off, and David was like, Mike, what are you doing? Why are you talking that way? And I'm like, that's you, David. So anyway, let's move on. Let's get to the good stuff. Hang on a second. I have one, ooh, that's really loud. I have one thing to do. I have to watch my time. And by the way, I am sitting in this period of time for Travis, who has been not feeling too well, but he is going to be here, I promise. And we're gonna show his film is a little bit later, is documentary film, not Fire in the Sky, the movie, but the documentary film, which I've seen and is really excellent. And then he's going to be out here and answer some questions. So we're going to flip-flop me and him at the end of the night. And again, I hope everybody's had a great time here. So moving on. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Moving on to the subject. I have to admit, I know half the town is red and half the town is blue. I'm blue. I'm sorry, but I have been since 1981. It's not a fair weather thing. And a certain person who organized this conference right there took that picture and brought me that flag. So it's his fault that's up on the screen. For all of you United fans, I will get that off the screen right away so you don't have to look at it anymore. It's funny though, because I'm staying at Hotel Football over at Old Trafford. So literally I'm literally not even across the street. I literally am on the grounds of the football stadium for Manchester United. So anyway, thank you guys for making my stay here very, very pleasant, and nobody beat me up today when I took a picture with Sir Alex's statue. Okay, so what I want to talk about at first is, because of the fact that I did this thing for Eric and I have a limited amount of time, I'm not going to be able to really go through things in a lot of detail, but I'm going to try to give you a really broad overview of stuff that's on the moon and stuff that's on Mars. And one of the places I started was the moon, because the moon is closer than Mars, and there's a lot of information on it, and there's a lot of old photographs out there of the lunar surface. This is one of them. This is actually an analog photograph. It's not anything that's been photoshopped, and it actually shows what's a pretty common moonscape, except for the fact that you see all this stuff up in the sky. And at first, when we first started looking at this, everybody thought this is dust on the negatives, it's scratches. It's like, no, actually, in reality, when you enhance the background, what you see is that there is something in the sky over the moon. Or as David Hatcher Childress would put it, the sky. There is something in the sky up there. I'll stop doing that. It's weird too, because I was with him last week at AlienCon in Pasadena, California, and the more time I spent with him, the more I was doing the impersonation, so I had to stop, because I'm like, oh my God, I just can't stop myself. So what we see is this stuff, which is really unusual, and nobody can really tell you what it is. Well, I can. It's skyscrapers made out of glass on the surface of the moon. And you see these in all kinds of pictures, and as an engineer, my eye immediately caught it. And one of the things I thought was, when I look at this stuff, what I actually see is structure. It makes sense to me from an engineering perspective. I'm not an architect, but I was a structural engineer in aerospace for years. And, as I look at these things, they make sense from a construction standpoint. And there's many others examples like this. This is what we eventually decided it probably was, which is some sort of scaffolding made out of glass. Now, you might think, okay, why would you put glass stuff on the lunar surface? Because you've got meteors and no atmosphere. But the answer to that is that in reality, lunar glass, which has no moisture in it, is actually about as strong as steel, if not stronger. So it actually is the perfect material to make a meteor shield if you want to live on the lunar surface and you don't want to get pelted by rocks coming in at 40,000 miles an hour. So this was the reconstruction of what we're looking at here, and it's all been beaten down and shattered over the years. And this is, to me, the best evidence that it actually exists. This is an Apollo 15 shot that was taken as the spacecraft was returning from the moon, and yes, we did send 12 astronauts to the moon, 12 astronauts to the moon. There were 12 guys walked on the moon. It did happen. It was real. All the things I've seen about the moon landings being fake, including the Stanley Kubrick thing, the Stanley Kubrick thing is ridiculous. So I've actually put that in the back of this JFK book, because I think it's really important that you can't say JFK got killed because he was going to go to the moon if there was nothing on the moon and we never really intended to go there. We in fact did. Now they took this photograph, and what's really interesting about this is that with a vacuum and no atmosphere on the moon, and they are out of the Earth's atmosphere, when they take this photo, what you should see is an absolute sharp edge right along there, but instead you see this gauzy kind of glow. And that looks like an atmosphere. It's not an atmosphere, though. What I believe is it's these large crystal structures that sometimes, in some cases, are 20 miles high or more above the lunar surface. It's either one of those two things. Either NASA has lied to us and there's an atmosphere on the moon, or these glass structures exist. It's one of the two. It can't be anything else, because it cannot be there if NASA's model of the moon is correct. So this leads to other questions. Well, why hasn't anybody photographed this stuff from the lunar surface? And the answer is they have, in a way, from the Earth's surface. And the answer is they have, in a way. This is a picture of the moon taken from an amateur astronomer on Earth. And you might notice the moon is a little bit more colorful than it's normally portrayed in the media or what you might see on a NASA website. And the question is, well, why? Well, if you had these glass towers above the lunar surface and you had light coming in, it would hit all these various different panes and shattered remnants, and the light would scatter and stretch, and it would become like a prism. So what you would get out of prisms is you get multicolored reflections and refractions of the light that's passing through it, which translates to, purple, lavender, pink, various different colors like that. And as you look at pictures of the moon, these are other amateur astronomers, you take them, you simply turn up the volume on the color a little bit, and what you see is there's all kinds of colors on the moon. There's amazing stuff there. This is an example of a crater called Shorty Crater on the moon. This is an Apollo 17 photograph. And first of all, I'm just going to tell you, there's a bunch of stuff in here that's supposed to be rocks, and a whole bunch of it is not rocks. It's mechanical equipment. It's shattered, it's beaten up, but it's definitely not rocks. But the important thing is, you got some orange soil, you've got some pink and purple, you've got really these weird colors that appear on the lunar surface. Here's another shot of it, which is a little bit more dramatic in terms of the contrast. Notice the astronaut's pretty much white, everything else is colored. What that means is that this light is actually being changed by something above the lunar surface. Now this is really interesting because, by the way, this is what I mean when I say the light comes in and hits these various glass panes and creates these pinks and purples and yellows and other colors. What's really interesting is this shot right here. This is a painting by Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean. Alan Bean was the fourth man to walk on the surface of the moon, and when he retired from NASA, he became a painter. And what he started doing was painting self-portraits of himself on the moon. And it started out with the really boring, bland, gray surface and so forth, and not really anything too interesting. But it bothered him. He said, even to some interviews where he said, it just didn't seem right to me, so I kept adding more color. Finally, he got to the self-portrait that he felt was the correct one, and it looked like this, which is exactly what this photograph of the lunar surface looks like. In other words, somehow he remembered that he had seen all these colors, but he didn't really understand what it was from and why it was happening. But he did remember it, and I actually think the astronauts probably were sort of forced. People don't know this, but the astronauts, all of them, when they returned from the moon and they did their technical debriefings, they were all hypnotized. Every single one of them was hypnotized to, quote, help them remember what they had seen. But when you listen to interviews, they can recite chapter and verse, their schedules, what they did. At this time we did this, at this time we did that. But if you ask them, how did it feel to be on the lunar surface? They can't remember. Either that or they have a panic attack like Buzz Aldrin did on national TV in the late 1960s and ran into the alley of the TV studio and threw up. That's MK Ultra mind control. It's what David Icke was talking about a few minutes ago. So. Also, one time we interviewed a hypnotist who was actually one of the people hired by NASA to do these interviews with the astronauts, and she hypnotized them. And so we said, well, what kind of things did they say? And she was like, well, they said, and then she said, come to think of it, I can't really remember anything specific about any of those sessions either. So even the hypnotist was hypnotized by somebody to keep them from remembering what they had seen on the lunar surface. So, Shorty Crater, really interesting place. You got some mechanical looking stuff over here, and then right about in here there's this really weird looking rock, which as we zoom up on it starts to look less like a rock. But the question is, what the heck is it? See this thing right here? I have no clue what that is until I start looking a lot closer, and then what I see is, well, it's kind of shaped like a human head. It's got a skull, it's got two eye sockets, it's got what looks like a nose, and yeah, it's got a painted bright red stripe on the upper lip. This thing is the head of a robot. It is an automated machine that was operating on the lunar surface. The crater got hit, stuff got thrown into the air, and this is what was left behind. It's really weird. I don't know what to say about it other than that, but it is the right size that they could have definitely brought it back from the moon. And what they would have been doing is a Terminator 2 type reverse engineering thing, like the old movie, where they get the technology and they start reverse engineering it, and from that they develop more modern technologies. They develop maybe flying saucer capabilities. So other things on the moon that are really interesting, here's a satellite dish, and here is a satellite dish. Only one of them is on the moon. This is supposed to be a crater in Mare Crisium, but as you can see, it's got some structure underneath it, pretty much just like this satellite dish. Here's a glass dome on the moon, and there's another one behind it. This is again in Mare Crisium. You can see right through this. You can actually see the one dome behind it. And again, I apologize. I mean, there's some resolution loss. It looks really great on my monitor here. But here is, now NASA's interesting because NASA Select TV runs really boring stuff during the day. But about 2:30 in the morning, East Coast time in the US, they start showing you the good stuff. And what they show you is high resolution images and films that they don't show you during the day. And this is a prime example. See this pattern right here on this mountain in the background? There. Line, straight across, all squared up, all rectangulars. Those are condos on that mountain on the moon, right where they landed Apollo 17. So we have that stuff. This is a really bizarre one that a friend named Alan Stern found. And it's like 5 or 6 buried wheels in the lunar surface. And they have spokes and they have center hubs and gaps in them. And, you know, again, I don't know how to explain that except that it's not natural in any way, shape, or form. Another thing I like to do is kind of look for special anomalies. This is an image called AS 113854. It was taken as Apollo 11 was leaving the moon. And there was a really interesting object right here which was called the Ziggurat, or at least that's what I named it. It looks like an Egyptian pyramid. But I also want you to notice that there's some stuff up here, really interesting, weird things. And as we look at the close-ups of this is the so-called Ziggurat. It's got very deep sort of wedge-shaped front. There's a square area there. There's a wall on this side. There's a square with a little dome on it, an entryway. It's pretty bizarre stuff, and there was a big controversy about it a few years ago, and I won a lot of arguments on it. This was taken from an Apollo 11 print, an actual first-generation print off the first-generation negative that was given to a worker at NASA back in the 1960s. And what he has on his print is completely different than the current web version of this particular photo. So this thing here, which just looks like nothing on the websites now, was actually a very prominent, very weird-looking sort of pyramidal object. Now, up at the top of the screen there, let me show you again. It's really bright. Up at the top of the screen there, I had a good look. So you just start looking around. I mean, what they did is basically they erased the pyramid because it had been out in public and was very controversial, and they left everything else on the image. So you start looking at the other parts of the image, and what you see is this sort of weird thing here, and there's something else here, and then there's this over here. Notice this is a rectangular sort of shape, or a square shape, right? And it is like a bunker or a hangar that's carved into the side of this mountain. Well, what's this thing in the side of the mountain? That's really intriguing to me. So I zoomed up on that and I started to enhance it, and this is what it looks like. See the disc shape right here? The dome at the top, the cupola, a couple of windows or holes, some weird thing on the front, and what looks to me like landing gear at the bottom. Or the best analogy I could see was like the Jupiter 2 from Lost in Space. So there are things on these photographs. You can do this yourself. You can pull images down and start looking at them. You're looking at flying discs, flying objects, spacecraft on the surface of the moon. There's all kinds of bizarre stuff all over the lunar surface. Here's another shot of it. So that stuff's all really fascinating, and it's led me to eventually start looking at things on Mars. Now, there's a lot of things about Mars I'd like to talk about, but I don't have time, so we're going to go through them, but I don't have time to really go into too much detail. I'd love to tell you about the fact that Mars is not a planet. Mars is actually a moon of another planet. It used to be warm and wet and rich and teeming with life, and now it's completely dried out due to some sort of cosmic cataclysm. I'd like to tell you that there are 2 distinct hemispheres on Mars, one which is almost smooth as a cue ball and one that has so many craters on it you can't even count them, indicating that it was hit in some sort of tremendous explosion, cataclysm, or something. Now, where did all this debris come from? Well, where it came from is, there are 2 bulges on Mars. One is the Tharsis bulge and one is the Arabia bulge. And the thing about them that's really unique is that they are exactly 180 degrees around the surface of the planet. The largest one, Tharsis, is at one end, and 180 degrees around is the Arabia bulge. So what? It's got bulges. Well, the reason why it has bulges is because it was once in orbit around another planet. That planet no longer exists in a solar system. And this is absolute proof that Mars was a moon, because any object that's in a tidal lock relationship that always shows the same face to its parent planet, the way the moon shows its same face to us, has these tidal bulges. They are absolutely a signature of a tidal bulge condition. So what that means, I think very likely, is that Mars at one time was in orbit around this other planet. This other planet exploded or was destroyed. I'm not going to make any comments about that. And all the debris from that explosion is what caused this incredible battering of the planet's surface, ripped off half the atmosphere, and made the planet basically uninhabitable. So that's the working theory, and I will argue that with anyone. Now, what does Mars look like? Well, this is what Mars really looks like. It looks like Earth. In fact, when Carl Sagan first saw it, he said it looks like Arizona. This is what NASA would like you to believe it looks like. Every picture they get back from Mars, in reality, they take it, they turn the red all the way up, they make it look weird and alien, like it's not a place you would want to live, but you take the same picture and you just balance the filters, the red, green, and blue, so they're the same, and you get a beautiful blue sky and a very natural-looking landscape, except that there's no cactus, but, they're working on that. I would like to tell you about pyramids on Mars. I wish I had time to tell you about pyramids near the South Pole landing sites, where they've actually seen pyramids that look exactly like Egyptian bent pyramids that are buried there. I'd like to tell you about pyramids in China that are unquestionably artificial, that match up very precisely with pyramids that are on Mars in the Elysium region, and to the point that you can even overlay one on top of the other, and they match exactly. So if one is in fact one is in fact artificial on the Earth, how can the one on Mars be natural? They're exactly the same. The slumping pattern, the degradation is the same. The only difference is scale. Could be that they've lied to us. There's some other really cool stuff I wish I could talk about on Mars. How about some plates, torn up plates on Mars? I got those. I got metal bits on Mars. I've got Captain Kirk's phaser that he apparently broke and dropped on the surface of Mars. I don't know what the F this thing is, but if you look at, there's obviously a formed like sheath around it. It's some sort of mechanical thing. There's this little cylinder sticking out. There's just I look at that as an engineer and I'm like, that's a piece of equipment. I don't know what it is. I call it Captain Kirk's phaser. How about a piston head on the surface of Mars? You want a piston? There's leftover pistons there. How about a wrench or a snake or something that's dead? What is that? I don't know, but that's off a picture from the Lunar, one of the rovers, one of the Martian rovers. It's a sheet metal something, and it looks like it's kind of mad, actually. Looks like a metal eel. Yeah, it's like, but this is right off a NASA picture that they don't even notice. How about a cowbell? Anybody need a cowbell? We need more cowbell on Mars. That's what that thing looks like. Now, there's other stuff on Mars, too, that I wish I could talk about that I don't have time to talk about, like the plumbing on Mars. Obviously, if Mars existed, if there was a civilization there, it would have to have plumbing, and they did some photographs of very, very close-up stuff, and everything looks fine. It looks like a rock until you start looking really closely at this area right here, and what you can see is that there's some sort of weird valve with a little dial on it, and, you tell me if they're not pretty much exactly the same. Valve fitting, I don't know, it's all over the place on Mars. There's all kinds of stuff like this. You want fossils of life forms on Mars, plant life? How about this? This is a crinoid. It's an old extinct water plant back in the dinosaurs' days, and this is another crinoid exactly the same on the surface of Mars. And by the way, what did Mars do when they spotted this thing in the image on the surface of Mars? They took the grinding tool and they ground it up into dust immediately. That's what they do. I'd love to tell you about fossils on Mars, dinosaur fossils. How about some bird-like fossils with eye sockets and skulls and things like that? Well, we got those too. I'd love to tell you about the giant stormtrooper helmet on Mars, which is this freaking thing that's been blowing people's brains out for years and years. I mean, this is not a rock. If you zoom up on it, it's got these sort of matching mandibles, it's got 2 eye sockets, it's got a nose, it's definitely a skull, and if you zoom up on the skull really tight, you can even see that there are these sockets in the side, which is what we have on our skulls for where the muscles attach. So, you know, I'd like to talk about that, but I just don't have time. I'd love to tell you about mossy rocks on the surface of Mars. This is one that Robert Morningstar found, and this is just basically a rock covered with green moss on the surface of Mars. I'd love to tell you about banyan trees on Mars. These are called Arthur's bushes because Arthur C. Clarke is the first one to have spotted them. The first picture is Mars. The second picture is Wayne Newton's place in Vegas. Okay? Mars, Vegas. Mars, Vegas. Mars, Vegas. Mars, Vegas. You tell me which one, if you didn't know one of them was in Vegas, you tell me which one is Vegas. You can't. NASA says, however, that this is an optical illusion. Okay, whatever. How about dinosaur bones on Mars? Here's some long, snaky dinosaur bones in the Utah desert, and here's some long, snaky dinosaur bones on Mars in some of the pictures. See this? These bone structures, they're backbones. It's those bones of a large snake or some sort of vertebrate. Actually, snakes are invertebrates, aren't they? Or are they? I don't know. I don't even want to get into that. But this is living tissue. This used to be something alive on the surface of Mars that's now dead. I'd love to talk about sphinxes on Mars. I'd love to talk about the pyramids at the Pathfinder landing site, the Twin Peaks as they call them, that have this condo kind of structure. You guys notice this? Can you see this right here? There's this winding thing. Do you see that? It's more prominent in other shots. That's like a road, and then there's all these blocks. Block, 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 row after row after row of them. Again, condos. I suppose the higher priced condos were up at the top. And then there's this weird sphinx thing out front guarding it. So, you know, sphinx on Earth, pyramid on Earth, sphinx on Mars, pyramid on Mars. This is another shot of what this might look like. I think it's probably 2 structures. This is some other enclosure, and this is the actual body of this thing with a paw and all that other stuff. It's weird. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Phobos. Phobos is the moon of Mars. It's considered to be a really scary place, and it has these weird cross-hatching patterns on it that go at 90 degrees to each other. Now, NASA says these are boulder tracks. So just to be clear, the boulders on Mars, they go north-south, and then they stop apparently, and then go precisely east-west and repeat it over and over again. That's what happens. And of course, nobody can find a picture of any of the boulders that carve these things out. This is a mesh pattern on Phobos, which has been found to be primarily mostly hollow. Here's a close-up. So what you're looking at, I think, is you're looking at the substructure of what was once a space station of some kind that's been built and rebuilt and has this internal structure to it. Here's a longer shot of Phobos. And there's all sorts of interesting things to look at on Phobos, including this thing. This is something Buzz Aldrin made a really big stir about in 2009. And it's called a monolith. They call it the monolith on Phobos. Well, why do they call it that? Well, maybe because it looks exactly like the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey. It casts a specific shadow. And here's the interesting thing. You remember the thing about, they had a scene in the moon bus when they were looking at the site in 2001 where they said, you know, the only thing we know about it is that it's 4 million years old and it was deliberately buried. And the reason they knew it was deliberately buried was because they looked at the area around it, and the base was a different color than the dirt around it because it had been dug up and disturbed so they could stick the thing in the ground. Well, take a look at this sucker, see? It's all bright, and then it's dark right around the base. Somebody took this thing and stuck it in there and buried it. Now, the Canadians were going to go visit. They were going to go land there and do an exploration in 2010, and then all of a sudden, all the news about that stopped. Their funding got cut off, and guess what? They never got to go to Phobos and look at what the monolith was. Okay, so because I promised Eric von Daniken that I would talk about the face on Mars, and then Eric went to Barcelona. Why does he get to go to do all the cool stuff? He gets to go to Barcelona. I have to go back to Seattle. What I was going to talk about primarily was the face on Mars. Now, the face on Mars is a really interesting mystery that's been around us for a long time. This was the first photograph in 1976 by the Viking team that took photographs of the lunar surface. And it came back, and there was a big stir in the US, I don't know about England, about this thing, head face found on Mars. Now, at that time, they basically said it was a trick of light and shadow, and when we took another picture on the next orbit a few hours later, it all went away. There were just a couple of problems with that statement. Number one, there was no second photograph taken the same day because it was a polar orbit and Mars had rotated underneath and they did not have an opportunity to take another picture of the face, so that was a lie. And number two, they never showed anybody the picture that they allegedly had. And number three, it was midnight, it was dark, it was after midnight on Mars, so they couldn't possibly have taken another photograph of it. So that was three lies in this one particular case about the face on Mars. Now, a lot of people will tell you, Nick Pope included. Is Nick here? Nick, are you here? Are you back there? Usually he's by the bar. Will tell you that there is this thing called Pareidolia, right? Which is supposedly, it's a very academic sounding word that basically tells you that, oh, it's not really a face on Mars. It couldn't be. You're just seeing things. You just have this natural tendency to recognize faces. And you look up in a cloud and you see a cloud that looks like the Easter Bunny and you think it's the Easter Bunny, but it's really not. Well, you know why when you look up in the sky and see a cloud that looks like the Easter Bunny, you think it looks like the Easter Bunny? Because it looks like the freaking Easter Bunny. That's why. This thing does not exist. There's an article on my blog on mikebara.blogspot.com. It says there's no such thing as pareidolia, and I go into it very, very deeply, and I just wanted to make this case right up front. One of the main things is that there are no scientific papers about a condition called pareidolia. It just simply does not exist. And what we find out is that the word origin, my pointer picked a really bad time to go out of commission here. And yeah, it's shot. Okay, the word pareidolia was actually coined by Stephen Goldstein, who was a editor for Skeptical Inquirer. Now, I don't know about you, but Skeptical Inquirer is the Spanish Inquisition as far as I'm concerned. They are evil, they are liars. They made this term up. They made it up so that they could have an academic sounding term which would allow them to dismiss anything that was ever seen on another photograph taken by NASA or anybody else. It does not exist. I have looked into medical databases. There are 4 or 5 papers that mention the word in the abstract, but not one of them actually has done a study. Because if this was an actual thing, they would be able to track and say, okay, what part of the human brain is stimulated? And they've never been able to do that because it doesn't exist. There is, however, another condition that does exist, which is called Prosopagnosia. I'm only going to say that once because I pronounced it correctly. The thing about Prosopagnosia, I said it twice, is that there is all kinds of papers about this, and they know exactly what part of the brain is stimulated when it happens and where the default is. Now, what Prosopagnosia is it's an inability to recognize faces. In other words, you could see the face of your baby and you would not know it was your baby from moment to moment. You simply are not able to retain a memory of that. And they know all about the neurological problem, where it develops from, what part of the brain is stimulated or not stimulated. But the interesting thing about Prosopagnosia is that 2.5% of the human population has this problem. So it's really kind of tragic, especially when you consider that 99% of the people that have the problem seem to work in the Planetary Science Division of NASA, as we will learn. Well, since this thing is useless, almost useless, well, maybe this will be better. Whoops. Yeah, it's not going to show. Okay. So the thing about the face on Mars, I'm going to move around because I'm not comfortable standing up there. The thing about the face on Mars is that NASA's official position is, and has been since 1976, that it is of no scientific interest whatsoever. In other words, we don't care about it, we're not interested in it, it's not anything we consider to be possibly unnatural. It's totally natural, totally explainable. That might explain why they've taken more than 70 pictures of the face on Mars to this point. It is, in fact, the single most photographed piece of real estate on the planet Mars. They take pictures over and over and over again. This is only a few samples of the images they've taken. They've done it with Viking, they've done it with Mars Global Surveyor, they've taken pictures of it with Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, they've taken pictures of it with the Themis instrument on Mars Odyssey 2001. they keep taking pictures of the thing. Well, if it's of no scientific interest, why do they keep taking pictures of it would be my question. Now, it's interesting because you guys use the imperial system here still? Okay, thank God. Yeah, miles per hour instead of, I watch an F1 race, and they're telling me the speed in kilometers per hour. I'm like, what does that number mean? Does it mean something? It is about 1.25 miles wide by about 1.5 miles long, or in depth. Let's see if I can get this to work. It has two parallel edges that run for hundreds of meters, yards. They're absolutely parallel, and this is not the best photograph. This is an ESA photograph from the European Space Agency, but they have these two edges that run absolutely in parallel to each other. There's a little damage feature here, a trench that's collapsed, which also looks completely artificial. And then the radius at the top and bottom of the platform, the first level, the bevel is the same at the top and the bottom. So you've basically got, just the platform alone marks it as artificial, because the fact is that you really don't get anything like that in a natural formation anywhere. I've heard people say, well, I've seen, natural formations like that. I'm like, okay, show me a picture. It's been 25 years, nobody's shown me a picture yet. So after the first photograph was taken, 35A72 on the left, then they finally did find another photograph of the face on Mars. This is a frame called 70A13, and the interesting thing about that one was that it is not the famous disconfirming photograph NASA said they had. It was actually found months and months later, and it was misfiled. Deliberately, obviously, misfiled. Because when people said, well, there should be something right here in the file, at this particular point, because they passed over the area again, they wanted to go take another look at if there was another image, they couldn't find it. And they eventually DiPietro and Molinar, a couple of researchers, went through photograph after photograph after photograph until they found it. And they found that the thing had pretty similar interesting qualities. For one thing, it had what looked like an eyeball on the right side, maybe an eyeball on the left side. It had a mouth. Maybe there were teeth in there. And they did some other studies. This is an example of something that's called a bit slice technique, which appeared to show that not only was there an eye there, an eye socket, a brow ridge, but there was something in the eye socket, maybe implying a pupil. Now, NASA laughed that off. They totally laughed that off. They said, that's ridiculous. There's no pupil. There's no eye. You people are crazy. They hadn't coined the term pareidolia yet, but they said, you people are just seeing things, and you're full of it. Well, then there were other shots taken. This is a Mars Odyssey image taken. It's actually better than the last one. You can see that the thing kind of persists. And it's always at an angle like that because it's about 33 degrees off of pure true north, which if you're into the Freemasons and NASA and all that stuff, you'll find that number kind of interesting. So this is another shot of it. So the more images we got, the more it kind of looked like a face. Here's a color shot from the European Space Agency. And again, you can see on the left side or the right eye socket, there's something going on in the eyeball there. And here's another color enhanced version that I did, which again, it appears to me to look kind of like a face. It's got maybe nostrils in the nose, it's got some interesting features going on there, and it's really, really cool stuff. Now the thing is, if the face was purely in isolation, and this argument's been made from the beginning, if there was just the face and nothing else around it, most of us would probably have given up on this a long time ago, but the interesting thing about the face is it's surrounded by other objects that appear to be artificial. There is the so-called city to the far left, which has a bunch of pyramidal-looking objects. Over there, there is the Tholis, this guy right here, which is a rounded mound, kind of like you have here at Avebury and Silbury Hill, right, in England. Only it has, in close-up, a tetrahedral pyramid on top of it, and that's pretty bizarre. There's this thing here called the glyph, which is a straight line that goes on for more than a mile. And then you have this thing, which is the D&M Pyramid, named after a couple of researchers. And it is actually pentagonal. As we get into this, I'm going to be juggling three different things here. You've got the city, you've got the fort, which is part of the city, you've got the face, you've got the cliff, the symmetrical mesa in the middle, the D&M Pyramid, and then the Tholis. These are all objects that were part of what was originally termed the Cydonia complex, because the name of this place is Cydonia on Mars, Cydonia, not Sedona like in Arizona. I was just there. It's not like that. It's a different place. Now, the interesting thing is that there were facets of the D&M Pyramid, for instance, that lined up with the face. For instance, there's an edge of the D&M that goes literally right across, right between the eyes, of the face, almost as if it's saying, look at me. And then there's another one that goes right to the tip of the tholus, and then this thing lines up. And when you start looking at this stuff and putting measurements on it, what a researcher named Errol Torin found, he worked for the Defense Mapping Agency, so his job literally was to look at satellite photographs and determine what stuff was camouflage artificial structures like tanks and things, and what was actually a natural formation. So he's an expert at this, and he said, look, this sucker has a bunch of mathematical constants embedded in it. Notice this is the reconstruction of the pyramidal shape of the D&M pyramid, based on the peak, based on everything that was, he put stuff that he researched here. He basically said this is the shape of this thing, and the interesting thing is that it's symmetrical on this axis. Now, what he then did, what Hoagland did, among others, is they went back and they looked at the rest of the alignments with the D&M and the face and the tholus and all this, and what they found was that the same measurements, the same mathematical constants repeated throughout the Cydonia complex, as if, like at Teotihuacan, as if all of these things had been lined up with a very specific purpose. Now, what was that purpose? We'll talk about that in a second. The interesting thing about the D&M is that not only was it symmetrical in this form, but if you notice there's this little edge here, as we got better resolution pictures, we could see that there was a rounded platform that it sat on, and it had this edge, and if you take that edge, what you can see is that it's also symmetrical about a second axis. So I've been told repeatedly that this thing is natural by people who are geologists or claim to be geologists, and by people who are debunkers. I just have one test for that. If you can find me a naturally occurring mountain anywhere on the planet Earth that is bilaterally symmetrical about two different axes, I will say that you're right. And again, I've been waiting 25 years for that, and I've never seen such an image, so I don't believe it exists. Here's another shot of the other axis of symmetry. Again, these things do not happen by accident, and as you dig deeper into the D&M, here's a 3D perspective shot. There it is right there. Again, taken because ESA had two cameras, they were able to make stereo pairs and take a bunch of shots together. Here is the D&M, and again, you can see that there is a triangular face there, just like you would expect on a pyramid at home. There's another one over here. There's a couple other angles. Here's another shot of a triangular face. There's another triangular face. So these things, again, are built up. It's clearly a pyramid, and there's some really incredibly brilliant new shots. Here's another one. Tell me that that is not the edge of a pyramid. Now it's eroded, it's beaten down, it's been there for a long time, but it used to be a very, very cool pyramid. Now, I have a friend named Keith Laney who he's got a website called keithlaney.net, and he's got a message board called thehiddenmission.com, and he is a NASA image processor. He worked for them for a while, and now he does new perspective shots of the D&M pyramid on his website, and I would highly recommend you go there because there's really high-resolution Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter images of this thing. And again, yeah, on top, there's condos. There's all these little sectional different images of the D&M pyramid. Now, after about 20 years of complaining, NASA finally agreed with their new probe, Mars Global Surveyor, to take another picture of the face on Mars. We finally talked them into it. They sent a mission called Mars Observer in 1993, which disappeared right when it got to Mars, and a lot of people think that was a little bit suspicious. But then they sent Mars Global Surveyor 5 years later, and they promised us a picture of the face on Mars, and so we all got up very excited on an April morning in 1998, and this was the picture that they gave us. I don't see a face there, do you guys? That was the whole plan. Here's what they finally released. Now, this thing is garbage. What they did is they took it, they did a bunch of stuff to make it look as bad as they possibly could. The camera angle, they took it from below, the lighting conditions were horrible, and then to top it off, they actually, well, this, by the way, this is the later image that was released. This is really interesting because they put this one out and they left it there all day until after what they call the 6 o'clock news in the United States. And in the US, the news hour is 6 p.m. It used to be the only way you could get your information. I mean, the internet was in its infancy then, and the only real way to get information was to actually watch the 6 o'clock news. So they left it out there. All of these guys, all of these news anchors, presenters like Dan Rather told us it was just a pile of rocks. It obviously didn't look like a face. And then literally 3 minutes after all the 6 o'clock news went off the air, they released this other version of it, which still looks like, but looks a little better than the other one, looks a little bit more like it might have been a face at one time. So they released that. It turns out, according to one NASA contractor, it turns out that they literally did 14 different things to the image to make it look that horrible. They went out of their way to do it, including using what's called an emboss filter, which, if you know anything about Photoshop, just completely destroys the information in the image. So that was a major setback, but they kept taking pictures. We thought that would be the end of it, but no, they kept taking pictures. Here's a picture of, it was a swath across the side of the face. This is the right eye socket. And, again, as I looked at this, to my mind, it got pretty interesting, because here is the eye, this is the brow ridge, and okay, so I can see this is not only shaped like an eye, it's shaped like a human eye. It's got that sort of oval structure. There's something in the area that is right where you would expect a pupil to be if this was a sculpture of some kind, and it even has a tear duct shape right in the corner. So I'm like, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff, and the closer you get to it, the more interesting it continues to look. Here's another close-up shot of it. There's actually, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but there's actually this pattern around it which looks like artificial structure. So this is the eye itself. This is the pupil. It's the right proportion. It looks pretty much like an eye. So what this proved out was that the original research that had been done back in the 90s was true, that this thing did look exactly like an eye, and it just happens to have the right size, shape, and proportion to be a human eye. So they continued to take other photos of the face on Mars. Again, here's the original Viking, here's Mars Odyssey, here's the European Space Agency's Mars Express. And as you studied it more and more, it continued to look like a face. This is the Mars Odyssey version. And then they also had on the Mars Odyssey, they had an instrument which was called Themis. Now, Themis was a thermal infrared imager. What that does is it measures heat, basically. And the bright stuff is hot, and the dark stuff is cold. So this is an image of the face on Mars that was taken before the sun had risen. It was pre-dawn. So what you're looking at really is just barely a little bit of sunlight coming over the edge. And the interesting thing is that it doesn't look like a face at all, but what is all this squared geometric stuff? And the other thing is that this is the vertical of the image, right? Straight up and down. But all this stuff is not aligned with that. It's aligned with the sides of the face on Mars. So it looks like what they're seeing is stuff that's underneath the surface, and it looks very, very geometric. Now, here's another version of that shot. You can see that there's some sort of weird panels and stuff going on there on this huge thing. Here is a visual image of the face with the thermal infrared laid over the top of it. And it all indicates that something really weird is going on the right side of the face. Now, the main thing that's happening is that on the right side of the face, there's a lot more, the left side of the face, the right side of the image, there's a lot more erosion. If you look at all the objects at Cydonia, they all have this erosion on this particular side. There's a definite predominant wind direction. Now, this is the area in question with all the bright stuff on it, and this is a high-resolution Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter version of the same thing. The tip of the nose would be right about there. This is one of the so-called nostrils, and then this is the area exactly to the right to it. Now, this was really intriguing because we got several good pictures of this, and in fact, with Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, they kept targeting this particular portion of the face. They took several more images. This is the Mars Global Surveyor version along with the Odyssey version. And again, you notice too that the face gets fatter and skinnier. And this has to do with the angles at which the images are taken and how much they're stretched or map corrected according to NASA. So they kind of make it look different and distorted. This is an enhancement of the Themis data done with a thermal infrared processing program. And what they found is this. The blue stuff is one material. The pink stuff is another material. So what you're seeing is what I just told you. The left side of the face, the right side of the image is this pink stuff. It's all messed up. There's something going on there. It's different than everything else that's on the right side of the face. So it looks as if what we're doing is we're actually looking underneath the surface of this object. Well, I also really liked the ESA image. I thought it was one of the better ones that we'd ever seen. And so what I did was I thought I got very clever. And I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if you laid one of these images over the top of the other and see what you get. Well, what you get is, there's the ESA image again. What you get is this. And again, it may not look like a lot to you, but to those of us that have been studying this thing for years, it was like, wow, this is really incredible. Because what you're seeing is You've got two distinct eye sockets. There's the other eye socket. They're lined up. This is the nose. This is the mouth. There's a little hint in the image that you got the teeth back in there. But notice the eye. You've got an eyebrow, and the eyeball looks like an eyeball. Now, again, I apologize. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Some of this stuff is going to look like an ink blot to some of you folks because there's about a quarter of the population that has a really hard time seeing things in 3D projection. So I'm going to try to coach you through this. But it was like, wow, to us, because when you start combining this, now you get these really incredible results. Now, what I would like to do if I had time is to take all the different images of the face and start doing, you could do literally 1,000 different combinations because you've got different instruments, different software, different hardware, different cameras. It would be really great to see what you get when you put them all together and what kind of composites can you make. But that's a project for somebody who's more industrious than I am. So as I started to look at this close-up area, this is the area on the right that was from the Themis thermal infrared, and then this is a Mars reconnaissance orbiter of the same area. Now what you can see here is that, at least I hope you can see it, is that there is a pattern. Notice these straight lines here, spoke, spoke, spoke. See that? There's even one that goes right down into this thing right here. Hang on, I gotta take a shot. I hope it looks better in the back of the hall than it looks up here. But this is a pattern of artificial structure. You're seeing beams, basically, beams or spars that constructed this thing, and there's others that go this way. So notice there's a little bit of a crosshatch pattern. Again, this 90-degree stuff, that's how you build things. That's how you make a mesh to build some sort of structure on top of it. So they kept taking pictures. Here's a close-up again of the area. And notice this roughly rectangular area here. And there's that one spar that's coming down. There's a couple more there. And notice this pattern right there. There's all this weird stuff. Here's some more structure. This is all structure. It's all exposed structure. Now this is interesting to me because to give you an idea of the scale of the face, this particular area is about as big as a 15 or 20,000 seat sports arena. It's literally exactly the same size as a sports arena where you might have, what would you guys have in an arena? We have football, we have concerts, we have basketball games, that kind of thing. So I think what this is, as I looked at it, and again, is that this is the surface of this thing, the face, and then what's happened is that this has caved in around the support structure. And as you look at it, you can see, here's a little bit more of a close-up. Again, you can see this pattern here, all around here. It's all patterned. There's, again, spokes coming down. Again, I don't know what these are, but this is a roof that has just caved in on this thing, exactly like has happened in the United States on several occasions. Here's another close-up shot. Again, look at the side right here. All of this stuff is rectangular. And then here you've got, it looks like a chain link fence almost. Spoke, see that? No, you're not seeing it, are you? So this is the understructure, and then this is the roof that has just caved in. And again, it's exactly like an example is this. This is a sports arena in New Jersey that got too much snow on the roof, and the roof caved in. See this? See the rectangular support structure with the cross beams? And look right there. Same thing. See these longer spars? Same thing here. Now, needless to say, if you have a collapsed sports arena roof on the face on Mars, you're dealing with an artificial object, not a natural object. Here's a color version they did. Not as good a resolution, but kind of shows you the same pattern. And here's another close-up of this particular area. See that sucker? Right there, right there. So here's all of the pictures put together for comparison. Now what's really interesting to me is that this image and this image right here and this one are different. But again, I look at this and I see this long support strut here, and I'm thinking, why don't I see it in this one? And part of it, I think, is because of the camera angle, the camera angle and the interference in the atmosphere and things like that. So I think you're just looking at different, that's why they keep taking pictures, because they don't have really good ground truth on this particular image. So the face itself is some sort of really interesting mystery that has a lot of detail on it. And there's many other things that I didn't want to bore you, but there's many other things about this that I think are really, really fascinating that you could look at. Now, I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I'm always looking for stuff in movies and television that reinforce my belief system. My belief system at this point was that, okay, the face on Mars is artificial. There's all kinds of pyramids and objects around that. There's all kinds of other stuff on Mars, which we've seen, plates and cowbells and things like that. And that means that something happened to this civilization. The question is, what happened? Well, my determination of what happened was that Mars orbited this other planet. This other planet was destroyed. A lot of that material ended up hitting Mars itself. Some of the rest of it was probably sucked up by Jupiter, and some of it was probably in the asteroid belt. And in fact, I think there was probably another planet where the asteroid belt is. So there were two super Earths, is what they call them, that don't exist anymore. And after that, what happened is that the people that were on Mars basically couldn't live there anymore because the atmosphere was gone. They probably tried to live underground for a while, and then they had to come to Earth. Now, as you might imagine, I was very surprised a few years ago when somebody showed me this comic book. This is a comic book called The Face on Mars. And I was like, hey, great. It's Jack Kirby. That's cool. I wonder who made a They must have seen the Viking picture in 1976 and said, hey, let's make a comic book out of this thing. I wonder what the mystery is of The Face on Mars. Problem with that thinking is that this comic book is from 1958. So 18 years before The Face on Mars was discovered, there was a comic book called The Face on Mars. And it's really interesting because what it tells is the story of the first human expedition to the planet Mars. And they climb up this face on Mars, and one of them falls into, guess what? The right eyeball of the face on Mars. And when he falls into it, he emerges. He lands in this beautiful garden area. It's like a vision that appears to him. There's this beautiful, lush garden, and suddenly there's air he can breathe. He takes his mask off, and he starts walking around, and what he sees is a race of giants. As he describes them, magnificent giants. So anybody read Zecharia Sitchin's 12th Planet? Know about that? The race of giants? So he says, wow, this beautiful civilization of giants. But then as he's watching their civilization, suddenly there's an attack. There's these ships that come from somewhere else, and they start destroying their cities and devastating the people and killing them. And out of the machines come these mechanical beings, these robots that are attacking them. They're not aliens, they're some sort of robots. And everybody fights back, he tries to fight, but tragically what he sees is most, if not all, of the Martian civilization is completely destroyed. And as he's stumbling around through the wreckage, he sees what the Martians decided to do about it. With the surface of their planet basically devastated, all the civilization devastated, they decided there was only one thing that they could do. And it's interesting too, because if you look on this one frame, what this guy is doing, this guy right here, is he's pointing to a map of a planet between Mars and Jupiter. A planet that as of now doesn't exist, but he says that's where the attack came from. So the only way that they can fight off the enemy and resolve the problem is to send a rocket with one man aboard it to sacrifice himself and blow up the other planet. And as you can see from the frame on the right there, second from the bottom on the right, it's very near Mars. In other words, it is, I think, the missing planet. And what they're saying is there was a war. These people built their machines too smart, like Battlestar Galactica. They came back. They attacked the people that had created them. The war went on, and what they were finally forced to do is to destroy the other planet, which devastated what was left of Mars. Now, it doesn't go on and finish and say, well, then they came to Earth, but it's pretty obvious there was no choice left for them at that point. They would have had to do that. So anyway, he falls back up. They get him back on the surface. They put his oxygen mask back on. He tells them the whole story. And then they decide that if they're going to find evidence of this race of giants, they're going to have to go look in the asteroid belt. So it's pretty weird when you have this idea, this theory, and then you realize somebody told the whole story back in 1958. Now, I never read this comic book as a kid. I've never heard of it, but it is literally exactly the story of what I think happened to the planet Mars eons and eons ago. So that freaked me out. So, okay, there's one other area of Mars I wanted to talk about here real quickly, which is there was an episode, well, I keep thinking you guys have seen the new season of Ancient Aliens, but you haven't seen it yet. So, or series, as you call it, right? There will be a new series of Ancient Aliens that's going to come out, and in it is going to be an episode about glyphs. They're going to talk about, are there possible glyphs like the Nazca glyphs, the Nazca lines, on Mars and on other places, and what do they mean? And there is this group of people who look at images like this, and they say to themselves, well, I think there's something really interesting there, because as we looked at this image, these guys decided that there was a parrot on it. So if you zoom up on this image, you see that there's something here that they found really interesting, and then there is this really weird sort of patterned area. Now, me personally, I don't really see the parrot. This is what they say the parrot looks like. This is all colored in. I'm not seeing it. The thing about, well, I mean, I see the parrot because it's all painted green and everything, and it looks like a parrot. But the thing about it is that, you know, all the Nazca lines and all the images, the spider and all these things, those are all actually there in one place. You see them over and over and over again, right? But here they're taking a formation on Mars that's here, and one over here, and one 150 miles away, and one 1,000 miles away. I think if this was intended to be communication, they would probably put them all in one place. Furthermore, I don't know why they would pick a parrot, but they picked a parrot. But again, for me, it's like, okay, I don't care about the parrot because I don't think it's a parrot. I'm interested in the city. So if you go back a couple slides here, when I look at this, the parrot, yeah, I can see what they're talking about, but this is what I think is interesting, because what the heck is that? Now, as you look at this, it looks to me like, see these little dunes here, they call them dunes. Those are not dunes, those appear to be waves. To me, those are like fossilized signatures of what used to be waves. So I started to think to myself, I think this used to be a lake or a river or something that flowed through here, and when it dried up, which could have happened very quickly, it left all these marks from where the waves used to be. So I think you're looking at a very, very interesting water-based feature, or what used to be water-based. And I find this really, really curious because, again, as I flipped it upside down, and this is another thing you should do with NASA images. If you're looking at something and you think you see something but you're not sure, flip it upside down, because sometimes it becomes very clear that they've deliberately flipped it for another reason. So this is the parrot up here, or what they think is the parrot. But as I look at this, I see things, I see a pattern. I see a straight line here. 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 You guys can see this, right? I see a straight line here. I see a straight line right here, and I see maybe a straight line over here. No. And I also see other straight lines that are, again, at 90 degrees to these. So I look at this and I'm thinking, these are roads. These are roads. This is some sort of beachside town or something on what used to be a riverbed or a lake bed on Mars. And if you look at it that way, I was like, wow, look at this dark area. It's almost like it's still wet, like the sand is still wet. It's still dark. You know how the sand is really dark on the ocean, on the beach? And this could be a pier. This could be a dock that went out, you know, into the water. And I'm just like, wow, this is really cool. Plus, what is this thing over here? You know, what is that pattern? I see, I don't know, the Indy 500 racetrack or something. I see reservoirs. I'm like, wow, this is cool. And there's all these little blocks. I mean, I wonder what's in all that stuff. So I started getting very curious. And as I looked at it, I did this. I went and colored in what I think it used to look like. So think of it as maybe a river where the water flowed around this way. And this is kind of a beachside town on this river or fjord or whatever. And there's the parrot, by the way. See the parrot? Upside down. But he's still a parrot. At least they think he is. And the most obvious comparison to me was where I was living, which is Redondo Beach and Hermosa Beach in California. So you see this is a pier. Well, there's a little pier there. There's a pier structure out in the water. So you got these kinds of things. This is the way an oceanside beachfront town looks. And it's really beautiful. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. Now, the parrot itself, I don't think the parrot's anything, because as I look at this is a wind-shaped formation, because when you have this sort of swirling curvature, that's usually an indication of wind has formed this thing. So I'm not sure it's a parrot. I kind of doubt it. But again, as I dig into this, I'm like, wow, there's 5 or 6 different sections here with some really cool, really bizarre, really interesting stuff, and I want to take a closer look at them. So I started taking a closer look at them, and I noticed, we'll start over here, and I see this road right here, and then you see these cross beams, or whatever they are, bridges, If you start to look at those, you see that there's the road, there's some other blocks that might be houses, there's these bridges that come across. See how that's kind of collapsed there? There you go. These are like walkways. People could like leave their house, walk down the street, come across the bridge, go to the ocean, maybe have fun on the beach that day. And here's another shot of it. Again, support structure, support strut, line, river, whatever. Here's the road. And then these, they're very blurry, but see, like, look at that one. See how square that is? These are exactly the same size as a house. They're like a 2,000 square foot house. That's what the scale is. So as I looked at this stuff, here's another one nearby. Again, kind of a weird road and with some patterns down there that are kind of what to look for. But a few blocks away is this area. And it looks to me like this is some sort of factory facility or something. This is a city block roughly around. Notice the square here. It looks like roads. There's something else down below here. There's this area. And I'm like, what is all this stuff? Because it doesn't look like rocks. This is a hangar. See this thing? It's a hangar. There's the entrance to the hangar. Imagine an airplane hangar. Here's a square tubing or something on top of it. Here's a little star thing. There's little tubes that connect to this. It's just, to me, looks like something like a facility. There's another storage facility over here. There's weird stuff down here. We'll take a quick look at that. And then this area, I don't know, the office buildings. Look at this thing carved into the side of this mountain. Again, it looks like somebody's office with windows or something. Here's the so-called factory area. And again, you could just literally come in with your car, go into the fence, park your car, walk right into the hangar right there. Here's the star-shaped thing. And none of this stuff is natural. None of this stuff has any relationship to rocks or mountains or anything along those lines. Here's the area below it. If you were to go down the hill here and take down these steps, go down these steps, this is an area, see these holes here? These are vents. Like if you were to walk down this staircase right here, this platform is on top, like you could sit out there and look, and then there's like, I don't know, a helicopter landing pad, a loading dock that goes inside. So you're looking at stuff that's got all the markings of a technological civilization. And there's not a parrot. So again, this is the access ramp. These are the different little city blocks. These are the vents. Loading dock. I mean, I don't know what these things are. Obviously, there's a bunch of debris that's come down, but I don't know what these things are. I just know that they're industrial. They're not natural. Here's the area I was telling you about before, the sort of office space area, which appears to be built into the side of a mountain. And here's a good comparison. Notice this with all the windows, and this is the Weyerhaeuser building in Washington State. Kind of built into the side, little vertical pillars. Same thing here. So, to give you an example of the scale of the things I said were houses, this is the area of these blocks, which kind of look like houses. This is a 18-wheeler, semi-truck, tractor, trailer, what do you guys call it, a lorry? That's the scale. So it's the perfect scale for a house. I mean, literally, it looks like there's a whole neighborhood here. There's some other stuff in this picture that's really bizarre. This is, I don't know, some sort of telescoping antenna or something that's off the edge of one of these. There's another thing I spotted up here, which is really intriguing, which is built up on top of a circular cylindrical structure, and it has these legs that come out. And to me, the best comparison, there's the antenna thing a little bit closer up. And again, streets leading up to it. But this is the other object with again, the legs and a little dome on top. And it's like, what is that? All I know is it immediately reminded me of this restaurant at LAX in Los Angeles. So again, see the circular shape, spoke. I mean, I look at that and I'm like, okay, that's artificial. Now, do I wish I had much better high-resolution images of this? Absolutely, but there's a story behind that. Here's the so-called reservoir area. This is the Indy 500 racetrack here, and then there's these really dark pits which look like some sort of storage tanks, and I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. And then what's this? See this square shape here? It's like a platform, and it looks like it's below the edge of a mountain, and in fact, it's dark in there. It looks as though this is some sort of platform that could be slid up underneath the mountain. And on top of it is this weird boxy shape with two holes in it, again, symmetry. It's some sort of gigantic machine. I suspect it's a drilling machine that was drilling stuff out of here, and then they would pump this into these reservoirs. Here's, in fact, a hose that goes all the way up to something up here at the top of the hill, and on top of it is this guy right here. There's, again, the close-up of the platform and the machine and the hose, and then up above it is this. This is, I don't know what to call this. It looks like a potato bug or something, but you can see the pattern on it. It's got a little hose coming out there. It's got, again, pipelines coming down through here. Here's a pipeline. You just follow it. It goes right into the back of this thing. I don't know what it is. Storage tank, pipelines. Beats the heck out of me, but it isn't natural. Now, the interesting thing about this was that all the other images that had been taken of this area were taken in the daylight when the Parrot City area was exposed to the sunlight. But then what happened was somebody requested that they take another shot of the area, hoping to get the parrot. Well, they did take another shot, and it doesn't really look so much like a parrot anymore. But the Parrot City area was in shadow. Now, okay, that's pretty cool. It's kind of an interesting comparison. As I got into this and sort of oriented it, it's upside down to the comparison I made earlier. So I kind of got into this and started looking around. This is the Parrot City area. And remember this thing that looked like a dock? There, that's it there. And then here's some of the front stuff. The area we looked at there, the factory area, would be right in here. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting because it doesn't look the same. What doesn't look the same? Well, this stuff is all white when it was all black in the NASA image. But see these spokes, see these spikes coming up out of there? Here's a close-up of it. And what I realized I was looking at was that this is a retaining wall, like a giant concrete retaining wall. Imagine this is the water. So they built this vertical retaining wall about 600 feet straight up, and these are parts of it. These grooves are part of it. But now this is really interesting. If you were going to build, let's say, a concrete retaining wall for a city or a town that you were going to mount above the Martian surface, you would do this as a means of stiffening, because what you do is you put in the curvature, the corrugated look, to make the frame stiffer, so it's going to be stronger. And I'm like, wow, this looks like it's really eroded and destroyed, but it is nevertheless appears to be a concrete wall. And why is it light when it was dark before? So if you do a comparison, here's the area right here that I'm just talking about, and you can see that there's these streaks here, but when you go back and look, you can actually see that these are the streaks. So, but why are they straight up here and they're flat here? And the answer is that what NASA did is they took these images and they stretched them out so that the vertical walls appeared to be flat, and then they painted in with a black pen and blocked off the white concrete structured look to it. So what I did is I took this image and I put it back, I compressed it back to the same perspective as the other Parrot City image, and I got this. And again, you can see that this is exactly the same thing, only here's the vertical stripes, the striations, only you can't see the detail in here because somebody's taken a black paintbrush to it and blackened it all in. And then it begins to look the same. And if you look at them side by side, here's my version of it, and here's NASA's version of it. Or here's NASA's version and the actual look. So this area is a couple of miles square on either side. It's enormous. And it looks to me like they deliberately tried to hide these vertical spokes because it would be obvious that it was some sort of artificial structure and a retaining wall. Here they are side by side. What this actually looks like versus what NASA tried to convince you it looked like. So my argument that these are roads still stays there, but what we're looking at is something considerably different than I thought. It almost looks like the city got inundated by some sort of flood on this side, and the retaining walls were badly damaged. Now, I'm going to leave you with a few other things about Mars. There's a lot of weird stuff on Mars. This is the best example of something weird I've ever seen. Somebody slipped this into under my door. Nobody ever slips me their phone number under my door at a conference. They always slip me pictures of cats on Mars playing air guitar. I don't really know what to say about this other than there is stuff like this all over the planet Mars. Here's another shot of it, a little bit more of a close-up. And I mean, he's got a cat's head, he's got an eye. He's doing this. He's like playing air guitar. He's even got a foot pedal. See his little foot right there? Look. I think I have one more shot of it that's a little better. Yeah. I mean, if that is not a cat playing air guitar on Mars, you tell me what the hell it is. Now, this is interesting because one of the things about the face on Mars is that people have argued that the right half is human, the left half is feline. And if you do mirror images, I didn't put any of these in here because I thought Eric was going to be here. You see that. So there's this weird feline connection. So, I mean, what the heck is that? The other thing I'll tell you is that this thing is 65 feet tall, and this alcove is like carved out for it. It looks like it was made to stick this thing in there. Now, again, breaking my own rule, I looked all around the rest of this image, and it is a massively large image. And there's nothing else that I would say is artificial on it. There's just this weird cat playing air guitar on Mars. So what I intend to say to you is Mars is a really, really weird place. So what I'd like to do is something a little different is I'd like to take about 20 minutes of questions. It could be about Mars, it could be about the moon, it can be about anything in the media about UFOs and aliens, fake alien mummies from Peru. It can be videos of drones released by the US government. Anybody have any questions? No? Yes? Okay, sorry. I could barely see you guys back there. Do we have a mic, by the way? Is Mike Anthony here? Do we have a mic we could give him? Go ahead and yell. Yes, sir, go ahead. Mm-hmm. No, I didn't see the large cat's head. Now you got me intrigued. Look, I'm just going to tell you, if you get into this stuff, you're going to end up being really weird because it just freaks you out. You talking on this image or further back? Previous one? Okay, where? Okay, there's this guy. So then where are we looking? Great. Everybody else can see it and I can't see it. You people are just seeing things. It's Pareidolia. So he's right there. So where's the other one? To the left. Above? Oh! Oh, holy. Wow. It looks like a fox or a cat or something, doesn't it? And this head looks a little bit more like a fox head than a cat. Wow. You know, I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna emphasize that a little bit more. And now, again, there's some other shots of the face that I wish I'd seen, that I wish I'd put in here now. That's, no, I did not see that. And thank you for pointing that out. See what I'm saying? How it takes a while to figure this stuff out? What else? It sounds like she's saying Elvis, and I don't think that that's true. Wow, I've stirred things up now. Elvis, this could be Elvis right here. See the hair? Wow. Okay, yeah, this is not exciting work to have me go, oh, is it where are you? Tell you what, send me, I'm on social media. Do some work and show me what you're pointing out, and we'll talk about it. We'll put it out or something, so appreciate it. Anybody else have another question that doesn't involve things I'm not seeing? Yes, sir. Oh, over here? Ooh, that might be a monkey screaming, right? Ah, really? I see that one. But again, this is just our Pareidolia. We're all just seeing things. We're just seeing shapes in the clouds. That's interesting. I'm going to have to dig into this because I have to go back. See, now you've made me go back to my original image, and I'm going to have to actually look for it and find it again. Amazing. Okay, anybody else have a question not about this? A seaporter, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is that you're talking about the Parrot City thing? Yeah. And it does look very, whoops, did I go the wrong way? Yes, I did. It does look very ruined and devastated. I mean, especially when you look at the newer image, this one. You know, it looks like this whole area was bombed out or something or very badly damaged. Now, Again, the thing about this is that you can, something really bad happened to Mars, whether it was a war, whether it was the explosion of the other planet that caused all this devastation with meteors. That's what you see. The thing is, people ask me, there's supposed to be secret bases on the moon. Do you see any of the pictures of that? There's supposed to be secret bases on Mars. Do you see any pictures of that? And the answer is no. All I see, everything I see is ruined. It's in ruins. It's completely destroyed. So I don't know if they had secret bases on Mars, why they would take pictures of their secret bases on Mars and put them out. I just don't think they're going to do that. So, yeah, see that? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I called you ma'am. You're too young to be called ma'am. Why don't we, or why do we? Why do we want to recolonize Mars? Well, I think the answer to why we would want to recolonize Mars is that it's the closest thing to Earth that we have in the solar system. It really is. It's not that far away from being a livable planet. Again, in my second book, The Choice, and also in the first Mars book, I talk about what happened to the original solar system, what happened a long time ago. And it appears that at least 2 planets blew up or were destroyed in some sort of, personally, I'll just, nobody can repeat this, it just can't be recorded, but I think there was a war. Yeah, of course, whatever was recorded. I think there was a war. I think that these 2 planets were blown up. They did not naturally blow up, and I've had an argument with some other people on the show about this. But there used to be an inner Earth, a middle Earth, and an outer Earth. And the inner Earth was Venus, which was very warm and wet and habitable, just like the Earth. And the outer Earth was Mars, which was actually a moon of another planet. And the middle Earth is this one. It's the only one that's left. If you look at Venus, you can see that there's a massive scar over about a third of the planet where something just came in at an angle and just ripped the planet, ripped a huge gash in the planet, vaporized the oceans, and created the volcanic atmospheric hell that we have right now. And I think that that was probably from the same cataclysmic event that destroyed most of the life on Mars. So to answer the question, it's that bad things happen in the universe. The Earth has been struck by asteroids before. There's the Younger Dryas Impact event about 12,000 years ago, which appears to have caused a great flood and ended whatever civilization might have been on the Earth at that time. And so we live in a shooting gallery, and we've only really had a significant civilization for less than 10,000 years. Maybe we go back to 12,500 BC. So it only makes sense that if we want to survive, we have to get off this planet and get to other planets. Now, as you look at Mars, the atmosphere is very thin. There's a ton of carbon dioxide on there, but there's not very much oxygen on the planet. So it's very simple to start terraforming Mars. All you'd have to do is genetically engineer some plants, some lichens, moss, that takes in carbon dioxide very efficiently and pumps out a shit ton of oxygen. And what would happen then is that the atmosphere would begin to build up, and you would eventually reach a point where you could walk and breathe on the Martian surface just the way you do on Earth. It would probably take about 100 years by some estimates. And I think it's totally worth doing. And people are like, oh, well, what if we contaminate the biosphere? Well, okay, there's not much of a biosphere there right now. It's basically a giant refrigerator. The temperatures get very, very cold. But it's not a hospitable place now, so what difference does it make? I think there was a civilization there, but it's gone. And I think the reason why we want to recolonize or think about colonizing Mars is because we could pretty easily, just by genetically engineering these plants and stuff, we could just launch them to Mars, drop them off, spread them out, and they would just start to be fruitful and multiply. And in a century or so, you have a place that you might be able to live rather comfortably. And I think that would totally be worth it. So not only are they doing it or they're thinking about doing it, I support the idea, because we have to expand. Like that TV show, The Expanse, we have to expand or we're going to be in trouble, because at the moment, we're very vulnerable, our civilization is. Yes? Yeah, John Brandenburg is the guy I have the argument with, and he talks about the nuclear war, and what I've tried to tell him is, okay, there is a possibility, because you can actually have natural nuclear chain reactions on a planet, in a planetary crust. It can actually, there's definitely been papers about this, and so he argues that the Xenon 129 on Mars is a signature that there was a nuclear war on Mars. Well, what I'm telling him is, I think it's the explosion of the other planet. Now, maybe planet V, planet 5, was blown up by a natural nuclear chain reaction, or maybe there was a war that blew it up, but that's where the xenon comes from. So John is really close, and we actually were at Alien Con last week in Pasadena. We had a long discussion about it, and we're going to try to pull together something to sort of debate what the signatures of that stuff means. I think it's very plausible that, sorry, I keep spinning. I think it's very plausible that we're looking at a situation where there were nuclear weapons used on the planet Mars at one time. But remember, it's also possible that the planet just blew up, the super Earth just blew up by itself because of a natural nuclear chain reaction. Now, scientists do not want you to know that planets can blow up all by themselves. Anybody? The reason why is because we live on a planet, in case you didn't check. But hopefully we're not going to have anything like that happen to us in the near future. Okay? Yes, sir, you in the red plaid shirt. Hi. Of the lunar what theory? Oh, what do I think of the lunar hologram theory? Well, I'll tell you what, I saw the videos and it freaked me out. It was a little bit freaky, but there's an argument that basically everything is a hologram, that we're all just sort of 3D interacting waves of light and sound. My answer to that is I don't think that it's really correct, because I've seen the videos. They're very weird. They could have been created by this guy. I don't know if other people have observed the same phenomenon. I don't think it's a projection in the sky, and I do believe that the astronauts did go and land and return material from the lunar surface. So that's where I stand on it. I don't know what to say about it other than that. I just think it's something interesting to keep our minds open, because, look, once you argue that a 1.5 mile long by 1.25 mile wide edifice on the planet Mars is a face, basically everything's on the table. So I'm willing to say anything's possible. We need to find out what the truth is. At least I think we need to find it out, because we're not getting the truth from the authorities and from the government, and we're not ever going to get it. I don't think that's why disclosure is such a waste of time wishing for that, because it's not going to be the truth. It's just going to be government's latest lie to us about what they've been doing. It's the convenient lie. So it's like it's going to be part of the truth, but it's not going to be the whole thing. So, anybody else? Yes, ma'am. And then you in the red hair. Okay, hi. Right. Jack Kirby has passed away. He was he created the Fantastic Four. I think the Silver Surfer. So he's created some very famous comic books, but he's long since passed away. I did find out he was actually good friends with a science fiction writer named Willie Ley, who was very good friends with Wernher von Braun, who was very good friends with Arthur C. Clarke. And so I begin to see through these patterns of association that maybe this is von Braun and the NASA guys sneaking out information into the public, because remember the Brookings report, which is actually the Brookings report, if you've ever read about it, is a report that NASA commissioned upon basically them coming into business. And it told them, look, you're probably not going to meet ET out there, but you might discover artifacts. Well, what did we just look at for a couple hours? We looked at all kinds of ruined artifacts on Mars. And if you do, you should seriously consider not telling people about it. And if you do decide to tell them, you should make sure that they are properly conditioned, culturally conditioned, before you tell them, because it'll freak them out, they'll go crazy, and society will disintegrate. That's actually what 2001, the Space Odyssey, the movie, is all about. Kubrick knew how to quote from that chapter and verse. So what I think is this is part of that cultural conditioning process. That was either that, or the other alternative is that there's a tremor in the force, and somebody time traveled the face on Mars to this guy 18 years before we ever took a picture of it. And I think that's less likely than the fact that they've known for a long time what was out there. And there are people like Gus Grissom. I know I've talked to people who talked to Gus Grissom over, he died in the Apollo 1 fire, but knew him back in the 60s, and he said he was always going on and on about how they had flying saucers. They had them in the 40s and the 50s, and they've been to the moon, and they've been to Mars, and they know everything that's there, and we're just all for public show. And maybe that's why he ended up dying in a fire before he got to the moon. I don't know. He was kind of a loose cannon and a loudmouth. Yes, ma'am, in the red hair. Yes. Well, the glass structures on the moon are in ruins. They're very shattered. If you look at, there's lots of photographs where you can do this enhancement, where you basically up the gamma on the background, and you can see giant holes punched in them. So they've been battered down for centuries and centuries and centuries. And there's a really interesting story about this. I was just watching something the other day, or somebody else was giving a presentation on the moon today, the guy who was saying that we didn't go to the moon. And he was talking about when they landed Apollo 11, that they got this alarm, right? You guys remember this story? You know the story of the 1202 alarm on Apollo 11? Yes, I'm getting nods, no, yes. You British are so reticent. Come on, say yes, it's okay. Yes, thank you. But basically the story is that when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were descending to the lunar surface, they got this alarm, and it was called a 1202, and nobody knew what it was. And basically what it meant is the computer is overloaded, right? Well, nobody really knows why was the computer overloaded. Well, the computer was overloaded because Buzz Aldrin had turned on an extra radar. They had a landing radar, which only looks straight down because that's where you're going. And they had a side-mounted radar, which was used for rendezvous and docking. He turned them both on, and he was only supposed to turn one on. Well, why would he turn on the second radar? Because they were worried that they were going to smack into this glass stuff like a bug on a windshield and just disappear into thin air. And what that did is it overwhelmed the computer, it overloaded it, and it ended up... Okay, and I have time for one more question, and it ended up making them have to go through this alarm, and they basically reset the computer and landed it anyway. That's also a great story because Neil Armstrong, the story is always that, there were boulders on the lunar surface, and we had to avoid the boulders and land, clear of the boulder field. And then you go to the NASA websites and you look at the pictures, and there's no boulders. And in fact, there's one thing where a NASA guy has scribbled on one of the images, one of the reconnaissance maps, points to a little arrow to this little tiny thing, and he goes, boulder? There's a little boulder question mark. There were no boulders. They had another reason for landing where they landed. It had to do with the Masonic ritual that Buzz Aldrin performed in the lunar module before they went out on the first spacewalk. Okay, one more question, and then I gotta go, and you, ma'am. Hey, she's a girl, they catch my eye. Yes, ma'am, what can I answer? The Ancient Alien and JFK Connection. Oh, a chance to sell my book. Okay, I will do that. The book is brand new. It just came out. You can only get it from Adventures Unlimited, but it will be eventually in the next month or two on Amazon and Amazon.com UK. What I found out, well, first of all, I was stimulated to write the book because of the new Kennedy documents that were released in October by President Trump, and they had a bunch of stuff in there that really, I have a very specific conspiracy theory about John F. Kennedy. And it involves a second gunman on the grassy knoll, Lee Harvey Oswald in a 6th floor school depository, and the second gunman, I believe I know who the identity of that second gunman is. It has to do with witness testimony that were there, and there's actually a photograph of the grassy knoll that was taken by a lady named Mary Mormon the split second before Kennedy was actually hit in the head with the fatal headshot. And what you can see is a guy up on the grassy knoll with his arms like this, and clearly there's a muzzle blast coming out of the rifle. So we've got all that. And who I thought it was, and I'm not going to give you his name because then that'll spoil the surprise and you won't read the book, but the guy that I thought that was is listed in these new documents as having not only been the guy who fired the fatal shot, it's an FBI document, FBI to the CIA. This blah, blah, blah guy fired the fatal shot, and he was also seen in Jack Ruby's nightclub. They call it a nightclub, it was a strip club, okay, let's call it what it was. Jack Ruby's nightclub with Lee Harvey Oswald 5 days before the assassination. He was meeting with this guy. So that all got me fired up and intrigued me. But what I got into as I developed it was that Kennedy knew about aliens probably from 1945 onward, because after he got out of the Navy, he was badly injured. He actually had to go to a hospital in Arizona and recuperate, where a woman, I forget her name, but 9 months after she was the nurse that helped John F. Kennedy, she gave birth to another guy named Bill Clinton that you may have heard of. So I found that fascinating. So, well, why do you think Ken Starr, you remember that whole thing in America? Ken Starr wants Monica's blue dress with the stains on it. Well, he wanted it because he wanted to know if Bill Clinton was an illegitimate Rockefeller or an illegitimate Kennedy. Turns out he's a Kennedy. But Kennedy was with a gentleman named James Forrestal, who was listed as a member of MJ-12, the original secret syndicate inside the US government that studied the Roswell crash and the alien problem. And he was with Forrestal after the war ended, touring Nazi Germany, and one of the places they went was Hitler's lair at Berchtesgaden, which is about an hour away from this plant that they called a rubber plant, which was actually a facility, the super high-tech, high-level physics facility where the Nazis were developing the super weapons that Hitler thought would win the war, including the so-called Nazi Bell, which is an actual anti-gravity reactor, which became the source of the power for their flying saucers. So the Nazis have said, since admitted, it's too bad Eric is not here, because Eric told me a story in Pasadena to the effect that Hermann Oberth, who was Werner von Braun's mentor, the guy who brought him up, told him, before he was ever Eric von Daniken, he was just a guy at a hotel, told him, and he stayed at his hotel, and he told him, Eric asked him, where did you guys get all this technology? And he said, oh, well, aliens gave it to us. I mean, this Nazi scientist flatly told Eric, aliens gave it to us. So Kennedy at that point knew that aliens existed, and he, like Forrestal, believed that we had a right to know that this was out there. And then there's other documents that show Kennedy was informed about other crashes at other times. And when he got into office, the first thing he did was he said, basically, I'm going to go to war with the secret oaths and secret government and secret societies. And I think they were fine with that until he offered to go to the moon with the Russians cooperatively. He offered 3 times to Khrushchev, and the 3rd time, Khrushchev accepted. The time that Khrushchev accepted was about 12 days before John F. Kennedy was murdered. So that's basically what the book is about, and that's the pattern. And I just basically lay out the argument that Kennedy knew that there were aliens, and he was trying to do something about it, and they were stonewalling him. And when he said, okay, fine, F you, I'm going to go to the moon on my own, we're going to have a civilian space program. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to not only go with the Russians, we're going to tell them everything about what we find. We're going to share it with them. Because they were going to share then the Anunnaki technology, and I think that was the last straw. They'd had enough of Kennedy at that point, so that's what the book's about. Okay, guys, I gotta go. Thank you very much. Travis is gonna be up next. His film, I have to tell you, I've seen the, I hope I wasn't too boring. I've seen the documentary film that they're gonna show about Travis Walton's case, and it is really, really good, and you're gonna find it really extraordinary. And then I think after that, Travis is gonna answer some questions. So thank you very much for having me. I couldn't be happier to be here, and I hope to see you guys next year at the latest. Thank you.